HRIS is incredibly important to human resources. If they pass away and they're in the employment of their surviving spouse gets half of their pay for a period of 10 years.
Wow. Welcome to the HRIS Careers Podcast with your host, Troy Wallace, a podcast for human resources information systems professionals to help you elevate your HRIS career. We always say no one gets into HRIS on purpose, but it sure is interesting to find out how they did. We interview your HRIS peers to find out how they got tricked into the industry and what lessons and tools they use to progress their careers along the way. We discuss industry trends, AI, and even talk candidly about all the most popular HRIS platforms. Just think of it as the closest bar just outside the entrance of your favorite HR technology conference. Now you get it. Welcome in. Welcome back to the HRIS Careers Podcast, recording live as usual from the beautiful studios in downtown Omaha, Nebraska. Today's episode is a special one. We're joined by a true expert in the world of compensation, Scott Trumpolt. With nearly 30 years of experience and over a decade running his own consulting firm, Scott brings a global perspective on pay, structure design, sales compensation, total reward strategy, all those things HRIS professionals need to know about. Here are 3 gigantic things you're going to learn today. Number 1, find out what company offers that unusual death benefit you heard about in the cold open. Number 2, find out why steering your career into compensation may be good for your personal bank account. And number 3, unravel and make sense of all the compensation-related professional certifications. In our conversation, Scott shares how he transitioned into HR, how he found his niche in compensation with the help of strong mentorship, and developed a passion for using data to tell meaningful stories about employee value. We also get into the role of HRIS platforms in comp analysis and key concepts every HRIS pro should understand, and his take on certifications like the GRP versus CCP. I will have Scott's LinkedIn and his website, HRCompensationconsulting.com, in the show notes. Whether you're in comp, HRIS, or just trying to figure out how all these systems come together, you're going to get a ton out of this episode. Let's jump in. Scott Trumpolt, welcome to the HRIS Careers Podcast. We really appreciate you being here. I even broadcast to the greater community that we're going to have a real deal compensation professional on the show because I was so excited to talk to somebody in the profession. Again, welcome to the show. I was hoping we always are interested in, number 1, how did somebody get into HR, HRIS, in your case, compensation?
Right.
So could you high level coming out of college, developing a career, how did this happen? How did you get this specialty in compensation systems?
I was very fortunate. I got my undergraduate degree in a completely different space than what I ended up working in. And I worked in that field for just a few years. Then I went back to school and got my master's degree, but this time in human resources management. I wanted something that was fairly broad. And I was working for a company in a different area, and they had an opening, and it was a perfect opening for me, Troy, because what they wanted to do was to bring me in and kind of see which area I might fit into best. So they tried me out. I did some HRIS work, as a matter of fact, keeping those things in order. I did a little bit of benefits, a little bit of generalist work, but they noticed that I had an affinity for compensation, and they decided that they wanted to steer me in that direction. And I was so fortunate because there were 2 gentlemen. The head of human resources was a former compensation guy focusing on compensation, and the other guy was a very high-level comp analyst. So I had these 2 mentors, and in the span of about 4 years, I feel like I got 8 or 10 years of experience because of that mentoring. They really allowed me to go along they brought me along slowly and really taught me that compensation is about looking at the data and then deriving some stories from that. What story does this data tell about the employee? What do we need to do to attract, retain, and engage an employee through compensation? So I learned a lot about how to take those numbers, because they just don't add up on a piece of paper. It's quite different in compensation. You're dealing with people and people's livelihoods. And what do the numbers tell as a story when it's linked to the individual or a group of individuals? What trends do you see? What patterns are we underpaying? Are we overpaying competitively in the market? And you start to bring in all these different factors. And that's where compensation really is. It's gray. It's not black and white. It's looking at different factors and telling a story with the data that you receive from the HRIS system, and really molding it to make a business case. Say a manager comes in and wants to give an increase to an employee, building that business case. Why does it make sense to do this? And I learned all of those things. And so it just fell into place. To answer your question, it was getting that master's degree in human resources, then getting this opportunity to focus in on compensation right from the beginning.
So I do this because I think it's so interesting how people get into this industry. HRIS, we joke on the podcast that, nobody gets there on purpose because, maybe you were in IT, maybe you were in HR, but somehow you got this molded together and somehow you get put on a project and you get into HRIS, but it's never on purpose. So you were at least a little bit more purposeful. Why did you choose that master's program in human resources?
Because I liked it. Always kind of was lingering in my head that, you could have an improvements in a software system. You could have a new way of doing things. But I was always fascinated by the idea that if you can engage your workforce towards certain business goals, I didn't have it all mapped out and all planned out in my head. But if you could engage your workforce, so much the better. Your results are going to be increased tenfold. And so I thought about how human resources fits into that equation, or how, I should say, human resources wanted to fit into that equation at that time, which was still viewed very much as a personnel function, or record keeping, compliance, these things, which HR still does. But HR, just when I was coming along, was starting to move into this more of being a strategic partner to business. How do we engage employees? And so that's what got me interested in getting the master's in human resources. I also was thinking practically. I figured it was a broad enough discipline that I wouldn't have to have something very specific in terms of an industry. Human resources is needed across all industries. So that was a reason too for deciding to get the master's degree.
All right. So were you still in your 20s at this point? Because man, that's pretty good focus for someone in their 20s.
Late 20s.
Okay. All right. So you had a little maturity.
Yeah,
behind you when you made that. So I'm going to take you back to something you just said about, you get the numbers out of the system, but it's still a gray area. And this is going to get into something that I think is very interesting about human resources in general, right? There wouldn't be a gray area if there weren't those little meddling humans involved, right? That make different decisions based on different inputs, and all of that. In your master's program, or I know we're going to talk a little bit more about your certifications, how important has been to understanding like some base psychology premises? I know in a lot of programs they have organizational psychology or industrial psychology. Has it been important in developing your compensation career?
Sure. That was a little bit of it from a human resources perspective. I remember one thing that my mentors told me. This is getting off the subject just a little bit. But they told me about the psychological aspects, and they told me that it would be good at some point in my career to also be an HR generalist. And so I did take a deviation for about 3.5 years where I was a human resources director for a small IT startup firm. And I learned a lot about human relationships in such a small, intimate environment. That's what was great about it. So yes, people get in the way of a
Yes, they do.
they get in the way of a perfect analysis because it's like a chess game. If a manager comes in and says they want to give an increase to an employee, we can do the market analysis and see where they are currently paid in comparison to their market value of their job. But we also have to look at other factors: how long they've been with the company, what kind of performance they've been doing. What about the people that are doing similar job or the same job? Where do they fit into this? Have they been with the company longer and getting paid less or more? So there's all these different human factors that come into the equation. So yes, that was important within the master's degree program. But again, it's kind of theoretical. And then you have the real life application, which is what I was learning at that first job.
Yeah, it's so interesting how it all pulls together. And I spent time as an HR generalist as well. And one thing that I do miss about, I call HR generalist sometimes you have some soft sciences and some human behavior.
Yeah.
And what I miss about that work is that you got to hear all the weird, crazy stories, the real deep, interesting stuff. Of course, you couldn't tell anybody about it, but it was certainly always interesting to hear what these humans were doing.
Yeah.
One thing I want to get into is, obviously this podcast is around human resource information systems professionals and developing our career.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we do is build systems to service what the compensation people will need to do, what the training people need to do, what the employee relations people need to do. If you could choose one compensation concept that an HRIS person may need to understand or might be most important to them, what might that be? Is it job banding? Is it market research? Is it, what is that kind of one discipline or skill you would encourage HRIS people to learn to maybe understand the compensation world a little bit better?
Oh, without doubt, the base pay structure. This is so important because the base pay structure for all employees, it's universal in its application in terms of what is needed from it. And the base pay structure is usually included in every human resources information system. You'll have the minimum, the midpoint, and the maximum of the range. And if an HRIS person understands a pay structure and how it relates to an employee's pay, this is very important because they will start to understand some of the key fundamentals of compensation, such as terms like comp ratio, which is just the relationship of the employee's pay to the competitive midpoint of their range, or range penetration. How far in does the employee's salary penetrate against the maximum of the pay range? And that's where you start to build those stories that I was talking about. So if an HRIS person, just by studying a pay structure and the important elements of it, this will really give them a good grounding in terms of the foundation of compensation. And then from there, you mentioned it, you used a different word, but the idea of career architecture, that these two pieces go together. This is a lot of what I do. It's like fusing the pay structure with the career architecture, the job classification system. So for example, in the world of HRIS, you're an HRIS analyst, but you're not just that. You're either an entry level, you're an intermediate, a senior, maybe you're an expert, maybe you're an HRIS manager or a director, so you're leading people. So these two foundational elements, if I was an HRIS person, and these would be included within an HRIS system, the job classification system and how it links to the pay structure, you would learn so much about compensation by understanding the elements that go into those two foundational items.
And you have been, in your own business doing consulting for 20 plus years, as I understand. What are the types of, I always say in HRIS, right? I've been doing independent consulting for a while, and typically nobody hires me to do anything easy, right? They got things to do the easy stuff. What do you see as the big challenges where they need to bring someone in like you? Is it to build this architecture? Is there 2 or 3 types of projects you're often hired for because you've developed a specialty, or they just don't have that skill set in-house?
Yeah, there's really 3 that I have found. I have about 30 years in compensation, but almost 13 of that has been as an independent consultant. So for the past 12, 13 years, I've been an independent consultant. And while the different industries I've worked in and the different types of projects and where those projects were located is quite varied, I can tell you that there are a couple of key areas that I get hired for the most. One of the things that companies aspire to is, from a human resources perspective, to be a great place to work. You see, there's awards for a great place to work.
Right.
And the companies that are usually winning those awards for a great place to work, they usually have high employee engagement levels. So HR is looking for solutions in different areas of human resources that help support this concept of strengthening employee engagement. And one of the things that they've learned is that employees want to have greater transparency to the market in terms of the value of the job. And they also want to know, where do I want to go? Where can I go from here? Because as I move through the organization, my pay will increase. So a lot of the projects that I get are oftentimes companies that want to do structural, foundational type projects where they build a crew pay structure, which is market based and is linked to these different levels of the different dimensions that separate someone from being an entry level to being an intermediate level to a senior level. They want to have a robust, rigorous development. And they'll bring in someone like me. There are much larger firms than myself that do this kind of work, okay? But a lot of companies don't have those kind of really deep pockets to pay a very large corporation, which has a lot of overhead. And of course, they pass that on to their clients.
Right.
Look to people like me that can do the same type of work, and perhaps in a more personalized and a more customized experience for a lot less money, because I have very low overhead, but I've been trained to do the same thing. I have access to the same tools. And so that's, and you hit on this, Troy, briefly when you said, regarding in-house, maybe they don't have someone in-house. I find that in a lot of companies, the reason why there's a need for my services is that oftentimes, this is not always the case, but oftentimes they have people that are really good compensation administrators. They're good at managing existing solutions that the company is doing in the area of compensation, but they don't have much of that expertise in the actual design of these type of systems. So if they want to put something in that's new, they will bring me in because they don't have that in-house expertise.
All right. So now it's flowing. I think I told you in the pre-interview, I always considered moving into compensation because, to be honest, they get paid more. People that are in that business and know that business well. But I never did. But let's get deep and I'll nerd out a little bit on this. So you are in there, you're building this architecture, maybe you're putting some different levels in, so there's a better career trajectory and people see that they're making progress and get promotions.
Right.
I remember, when I studied this a little bit more, they would talk about building the compensation structure and then making it defensible, right?
Yeah.
What are the things that, how can you justify the different levels of pay?
Mm-hmm.
So from maybe a junior to a mid-level to a senior manager, director, et cetera.
Yeah.
Is that still a thing where you've got to make sure that when you're building these structures, it's defensible on what you're paying these people? And does the hay method still exist? Or are there different methods these days?
Well, more than ever, I would say more than ever, it's very important to be defensible because there are new pay transparency laws that are going on in the United States where you have to start sharing more of the pay range with the candidates. It's not in every state, but it's growing. There's some states where you have to at least share the range with candidates. Uh, various Because newer generations coming up, they want to have more of that transparency on pay, what different jobs pay. So the more that you can, while still protecting the company's interests and the business needs, the more that you can be transparent, particularly about career development, career architecture. Where does someone go from here? Changing the dynamic of that conversation from, I want to get paid more money, to this is how you can get paid more money. You've got to link it to the business need, and you might have to move laterally and gain skills in a certain area before you could move upward. Do you want to be an individual contributor? Do you want to continue on that pathway just at a higher level? Do you want to become a people leader? Now, the idea of defensible comes into having a market-based system. Yes, hay is still around. There's people that really believe in that. I'm very much a market-based model where you're really determining the different levels within a job and the job itself based on what the market pays for that job and within the industry and the size of the companies and the geography that you're competing against as a company. So it's not just a one size fits all in terms of building a structure. You have to listen to the client. Not all clients want to pay competitively on the base pay. Some want to pay more on the variable pay side. They want to encourage that type of behavior. So they want to grow more on the results-based incentive side. So there's all these different factors, but yes, more than ever, it's critically important. And one way to be as defensible as possible is to go based on the market.
Well, it's interesting, and we have a job board on HRISCareers.com if anybody wants to post to it. It's free right now. And so I pay attention to job postings and looking at things all the time. And I found a job posting, and maybe they did this to get people's attention. So they had the pay transparency information on there, and this was a job for an HRIS analyst.
Okay.
Now it was for Workday, which is a popular,
Sure.
software package and in demand.
Sure.
Had the range, and I'll see if I can find the screenshot and I'll pop it in so you can see it on YouTube. I believe the range was between $105,000 and $495,000.
Wow. Okay.
I think they definitely, either there was a snafu there in the HRIS system, or they wanted to be very liberal in that. So there's definitely a lot of confusion around pay transparency still.
Yeah, that's a very, very broad range, and might take a lot of things into account. It sounds like they're posting the entire range from the minimum, but for a single range, that would be a tremendous, tremendous width. So again, I'm not sure what they're trying to accomplish there. Usually what I see is they'll show you the minimum of the range and perhaps the midpoint of the range. Now, the midpoint is typically usually where someone is fully competitive with market, but not everybody that goes into a job is necessarily going to get the full market value. They may be in a certain point in their career where they need to grow further and obtain more skill sets to be fully up to getting their market value. But that's usually what I see is they will post maybe the minimum to the midpoint, but they won't post the entire range.
Got it. Yeah, that's, all of that. I remember sitting in my first job in HR, we had a PhD that was sitting in the compensation manager's seat. And so I remember going through those pointing systems, and he was very precise. The line managers hated it, but he made everybody go through it and cross all the T's. So we had that kind of defensibility around the pay structure. So I want to hit on something that's kind of, I'll call it more current. And we talked, exchanged some emails about it, but talking about the impact of inflation. So everybody's talking about that now. I was a toddler, but I lived through the 70s, and heard tales of the runaway inflation in the late 70s, early 80s. So there can be two types. So we're having some inflation now. I think everybody would objectively see that. And then I've had in my experience, so I worked for a company in Scottsdale, Arizona, did heavy construction machine rentals, and they were working up in the Alberta oil fields that had just gone crazy. I think it was called Fort McMurray. And so they had localized inflation, right? Just the cost of living was going crazy because there were so many people going in there. It's like a gold rush. How can somebody deal with that in a compensation manner that is defensible when there's this kind of unplanned disruption to the system where there's localized inflation or nationwide inflation? Do you have to go through a full analysis? How does a compensation person handle a situation like that?
Well, in my line of work, it hasn't really come up in these years because things have been pretty steady. I mean, you're going back to 1979. I mean, if you look at the average pay increases, the merit pay budgets over the past number of years, they've been pretty steady. Even with the inflation, the spikes in inflation that we've experienced more recently. I mean, back in the late 70s, it was, I remember I was, starting high school. So I just remember that inflation was at the time something that everyone was talking about. And but as far as more recently, I haven't seen, within the United States, I haven't seen any dramatic changes except with inflation, just having a greater focus on making sure that people are getting paid against the market competitively. And the nice thing now is back when I started, you would get market data once a year,
right?
Or maybe every 6 months. And they come in with these binders, these books, and you had to parcel through them. Now the data gets there's an algorithm, and it's pretty much up to date, and you're getting data either monthly or quarterly from various sources, and it's so that helps really a lot to in times of more inflation, just making sure how is that going to affect your budget. One thing that is often done is a separate cost of living increase. That's one. When you think of compensation, oftentimes you think of, okay, a base pay increase. It could be an equity adjustment based on changes in the market. Say you're making $80,000 and suddenly the market says that the average person in your exact circumstances is making $90,000. You might do a market equity adjustment. Or in times of inflation, oftentimes what you will see is the company as a whole, they'll have a merit pay increase based on performance, and then they'll do a cost of living increase based upon some of the factors that you're talking about. But as far as something isolated, unless the individuals that were working up in Canada, were they living there? Were they permanently based there? Or
Yeah, so this situation, so you talked earlier about the information coming out more frequently these days. You get better information, more up to date. Their feedback loop was, we just hired a guy for $23 an hour. And this was back in like 2006, 7, for $23 an hour. McDonald's just came over here, took the guy out of the oil fields because they offered him $28 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then a month later, somebody got the guy from McDonald's, offered him, $38 to go back into the oil fields. And this was all happening like real time every couple of months. So they just had no choice, right? It was a weird event.
Yeah, one of that definitely sounds like an isolated issue, that much volatility. But the other thing that we do in compensation is we look at not the cost of living, but the cost of labor, which varies significantly in different areas of the United States. So we might build a national pay structure based on the United States national average, United States cost of labor. But then we do an individual analysis of all the cities where our employees are located. We do an average of different salary amounts to see. So, for example, if you're in Stamford, Connecticut, you might be part of the same pay structure, but it's adjusted by 20% because the cost of labor is 20% higher in there. So that's one of the things, one of the ways that we combat changes in cost of labor. Even within my own state in Florida, I live in the Fort Lauderdale area, which is around the national average. Okay. And, but there are parts like in Pensacola, which is only 90% cost of labor. So it's a lower cost of labor. So if I was building a project for Florida employees and they had employees in both locations, the people in Pensacola would be part of the same structure, but adjusted by 90%, by 10% lower than the national average. So those are the kind of things we do, but not so much cost of living, but cost of labor. What does that local market pay for different jobs?
Right, and that absolutely makes sense. So I told you earlier that I've dabbled in my career of the reason I got an HRIS in the first place is I saw the salaries when I was late 90s when client server was taking off. I was like, oh, this looks interesting. It's human resources related.
Mm-hmm.
So I got wooed again as you review job listings and you see the compensation folks always getting the best salaries in the HR department. And it's important work. The VP of or director of total rewards. So then often HRIS managers, directors will report up through maybe a VP of total reward. So they'll handle the compensation structure. They'll be overall over the HRIS, and then someone in our line of business will report up and through them. If somebody wanted to transition from HRIS to a compensation role, there are a couple of certification designations, of which I know you have one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that looks like. Is it a world of work? Do they administer? And so I know there's the Certified Compensation Professional, the CCP.
Yeah.
And then there's the designation you have, which seems to have more of an international scope. Is it called the GRP?
Yeah, Global Remuneration Professional is what they call it. The two programs are quite similar. The core courses are actually the same. I would say, but if you want to know about what that process looks like, it's basically 10 different modules, I think it was. Maybe it was 9 different modules. And each one of them has a book. And each book focuses on a different area of compensation. So one will be on base, it'll be about pay structure design. Another one, the book will be all about variable pay. And another one will be about sales incentives. Another one will be about quantitative analysis, okay? More broader quantitative analysis where you got to get out the old calculator and do these formulas and things. And what happens is you can either attend a class which helps you to prepare, or you can get the book as a member and review the material from the book and then take an examination. It's really a nice, simple process because for me, I got it when I decided when I became an independent consultant, hey, wouldn't it be great to get my certification? I had all this experience, hands-on experience, but I hadn't gotten my certification. So I thought this will help me a little bit as I go on my journey to becoming an independent consultant. So what I would do is and I had a lot of life work experience. So I would read these books, prepare for the exams, go down to the exam center and take the exam. And you needed to get 80% or 85% correct on each exam. And then, so you take the exam, and without getting too much into the weeds, it's a series of exams that you take. And then once you complete them all, and you pass the test, then you get your certification. The only reason I took the GRP was because by that point, I had worked on some global projects. And so a few of the courses were more in the GRP were designed more for the person that may work on things from a global perspective. And so, for example, I had built a pay structure for a client in the United States, but I had also modified that structure and went to China and I adapted it there. So I always had this global emphasis. My last job in corporate was working overseas in Europe. So I always had that global feel and approach that I wanted to emphasize in my work.
So I just sat for the project management professional certification. I'm going to let that hang out there because it's going to be a different episode. I'm not going to tell you whether I passed or not, people. So I've got a little PTSD from that already. When I worked for, his name was C.R. Dodge. C.R. Dodge, I hope you're out there still practicing. He was the VP of Total Rewards, and he had a CCP designation. And I said, I'm interested in that. And so one day, and this was 2006, 2007, where things were still, a lot of print. And he comes in with only like the first 3 manuals for the first 3 tests. And I mean, he can barely carry them into my office and he slams them on the desk. Right. And I'm just looking at these monstrous manuals. I was like, well, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe. So I know it's a lot of work. Now, do you have to, for the CCP, maybe sounds like it's more domestic, then GRP is more international. Do you have to prove to them that you've had that true work experience to qualify for to even take the GRP?
No.
Or just you can, if you can pass it, you can pass it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this recertification process, but the reality is that once you've passed, and it's on your record. Someone can go out to World at Work and see your profile, and they can see the exams you took and that you passed them and everything. I know what you mean about the books, though, because early on in my career, they sent me to a few of the classes. I was going to get my CCP certification, but I just took a couple of classes and the books were a lot bigger. They've simplified it now. There's still books, but they've weeded out some of the extraneous content or whatever, and they're simpler to follow. There's still books, but I think they've gotten that point that they needed to be more focused.
So I'm going to bring it back to the HRIS world again. And you've been hired by a client and they don't have a name brand HRIS system. Do you dread that? Or are there platforms that if you get into a client and you say, oh, you're using Workday, or, oh, you're using SAP or an Oracle product, that you're like, great, I know that's going to have the information that I likely need to help them with their analysis. Are there any HR software vendors that you favor when you come into a deal, or are you kind of agnostic to it?
I'm kind of agnostic to it. I mean, I like Workday and everything like that, but the nice thing is about some of the HRIS systems are getting to the point where they should be, where you can do a query and not just get the basic information, but also start to provide some real analysis points without having to take it out of the HRIS. Typically, what I ask a client is, I will ask them for certain data fields. Okay, these are the data fields that I need from HRIS. They will have their HR person run that report to me. I download it and I put it into Excel, and then I manipulate it in the way that my compensation knowledge, but what allows me to then do the kind of analysis that I want to do. So it's like I'm taking the raw data, but what's nice is that the HRISs are getting more and more sophisticated so that they can start to pump out of them reports that have some of the analysis that I do on the outside. Because again, the reason I'm agnostic about it, or have been for most of my career, is that these are the fields I need. I don't care what system you you have just, these are the fields I need. I'll take that data and then manipulate it and massage it in Excel. But one of the nice things, again, is that HRIS and compensation, sometimes I work with HRIS departments to help them understand these are the fields that the compensation expert on your staff is going to need. And hey, by the way,
Right.
do you have a place in there? And sometimes they'll say, yes, the reason I like Workday is they seem to have the capacity, the flexibility. And I'm not saying they're the only ones, because that wouldn't be true. But to put in additional fields besides the obvious, they'll say, okay, our HRS needs to have a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum for each range. And I'll be like, yeah, but can you put in this formula for comp ratio so it automatically calculates? It's just taken a few steps out of the process that I have to do. But again, to answer your question, I'm more or less agnostic about it, because I take the raw data, and then I do things with it to start telling stories to my clients that they can grab onto.
Got it. And then have you found that your clients, or maybe you help bring these tools to them, are there any kind of niche compensation software systems that you're seeing people commonly use, like Calidus, or, I don't know all the names anymore, but actually, I'll put in the show notes. I did kind of an overview of the HRIS and compensation software world probably about 3 months ago, so I'll put that episode in the show notes. But are there any kind of niche players that are real specific to compensation that you've found often that your clients are using or that you like?
Well, you mentioned Calidus, and Calidus, I see clients using it for particularly sales compensation.
Right.
Running, the whole sales compensation from start to finish in terms of the different aspects, the reporting that the sales people need to do on a regular basis, to actually calculating their sales incentive payouts. So that's one, for example, that's a specialty. But one of the problems is that human resources is not a profit center, obviously. They're not a business unit per se, in the sense that they contribute to the company's success, but in an indirect way. But because they don't generate the revenues, or they're not managing the revenue, they're not sales, they're not operations. The point I'm getting to is, and you may have surmised this, is that HRIS has a very difficult time obtaining the necessary funding to buy some of the systems that you're talking about, these niche systems. And they often tend to run on outdated HRIS, or they do get an HRIS, but they can't turn on certain modules because its expenses are very closely watched in human resources, because there's still the feeling that how much of what human resources does is strategic, and how much of it is tactical. How does HR contribute to the bottom line? That's what the business is always questioning. And when you're questioning, sometimes you won't get the type of funding unless you have a really strong advocate. And so I'm oftentimes working with not specialty systems, but just kind of the basics. They may have taken their ADP payroll system and added some features to it to turn it into a human resources system somewhat. And that's just the reality of things, especially for a small company. So I don't see a lot of my clients having that level of sophistication, is what I'm trying to get across.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is, you said that so politely and nicely. Every HRIS professional that is listening to this is like, you got that right, Scott. Yes, we never get the right funding. We never get. We're always the last to be funded. And I would say a lot of us would probably insert some expletives. We would all agree. We don't always get the best software tools in the HR world.
Or if we even get one, I mean, it might be, thank
Yes.
God for Excel, because if you really know what you're doing in Excel, it's not ideal, but you can get by. Obviously, a lot of companies are doing better than that, but It's just a beautiful, an HRIS system that does all these things is beautiful. It has its plate. HRIS is incredibly important to human resources. It's just a matter of how much we get our hands on that.
All right. Well, that gave me the clip for the cold open. Is you saying how important we all are to the process? We certainly appreciate that.
Well, I mean, it's foundational. Top analyst is only as good as the data that he gets out of the system. And so I always tried to work closely with HRIS. In fact, one of my leaders of human resources, I work for a few different companies, he had an HRIS background. And that was his area of human resources. And so for all you HRIS folks out there, yes, you can make it to the top role.
Yes, I am finding that a little more often these days that people transitioning from the HRIS world. Now it's usually somebody who's gone functional into HRIS, then can find their way in that top spot. But yeah, it's the mobility is definitely better these days. So Scott, I put this in the interview notes. You may have not looked at it, and it's even more fun if you didn't. So we like to do a fun thing called the lightning round on the HRIS Careers podcast. I ask the questions quickly. You don't have to answer them quickly. And it's usually 3 or 4 good ones. If you're not comfortable with the question for any reason, because sometimes they're a little silly, certainly tell me pass, or we can edit it out. But we're going to go with question number 1. What is the most unusual or weirdest perk or benefit that you've seen a company try to include in their total rewards package?
Well, there was one. It wasn't that long ago. I don't know this from actually working with a client, but I don't know, Google, one of the benefits they offer their employees is a death benefit. Okay. Most companies, when you see their perks, they'll talk about, we'll give you 3 times your salary as life insurance.
Right.
And yes, it's obvious if something happens to you, this kicks in, but it's not so obvious as saying, oh, we're including a death benefit. And I heard about this. And so I did a little bit of research, and basically how it works is that this is something they offer their employees. If they pass away and they're in the employment of Google, their surviving spouse or whatever gets half of their pay for a period of 10 years.
Wow.
So that's, and so you don't think when you're interviewing an employee, a possible employee, you, as a recruiter, you wouldn't really, the reason it's weird is you wouldn't say, oh, by the way, we offer this special death benefit. So that it's weird in that sense. I've heard of some companies that do some type of egg fertilization, a benefit where couples trying to get pregnant or whatever, they get involved in paying the costs of doing different aspects of that. But mainly, I find that the big area of focus is not weird, but it's very much paid time off, very much that this is a crucial one for employees wanting to understand the paid time off policy. And so I get inquiries, even though it's not directly related to comp, it does eventually result in compensation,
right?
Surveys and things like that. But yeah, that death benefit, that struck me. That was an interesting one.
That is interesting. All right, number 2. So you went to Nichols College. It's in Massachusetts, right?
Yeah, but just barely.
Just barely? Are you still in the Massachusetts area?
No, I'm in Florida. I have been for decades. It's a long time ago. But yeah, it's you could almost throw a stone into Connecticut.
Okay.
Tucked way down in the southern part of the state, but yes.
All right. Well, here's the question.
2.
What is the mascot?
The mascot is a bison.
Yes. Ding, 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 ding. There we go. All right. Nice, easy one there.
Well, maybe not.
Yes.
I wasn't a rah-rah guy in the college. I may not have known that, but yeah, I did pick up on that at least.
3.
What is your go-to coffee or beverage during marathon comp planning meetings?
Coke Zero.
Oh, you're a Coke Zero. See, I'm a Diet Coke guy.
Yeah, this is Coke Zero. Okay, yeah, you're saying, yeah, okay, there is a difference, absolutely. Yeah, no question about it. I don't want the sugar, but I need the caffeine.
So for bonus points, do you like it better out of the can or out of the fountain?
Out of the can, or I would be out of the fountain.
Oh, you got the bonus points. I agree. That's I've been trying to kick the habit for 20 years, but I just can't do it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a coffee drinker, and I guess that would be healthier because this has, chemicals in it and things like that. But it's just the nature of the beast. You need something to, kick in. And so.
Yes. And I'm not a coffee drinker either. And so my wife claims that I'm not actually quite an adult because I don't drink coffee. I was like, hey, I don't know what it is. I just not a fan.
Yeah. I came from a family of coffee drinkers. I don't get it. I just don't like the taste of coffee. That's all.
Yes, absolutely. All right. We'll call this the last question. I think we are question number 4.
4.
If you could instantly master one new HR tech skill or platform, what would it be and why? Is there something out there, a tool that you've seen that, boy, I wish I had an extra week or 2 weeks and I'd go learn how to use that particular tool? Is there anything sitting out there that has piqued your interest?
Well, not so much of an automated tool, but the concept of executive compensation. This is a big area. It's not that I don't have any expertise or any knowledge of executive compensation, but it really is its own animal. But it's something that usually I've advised top executives who work with a compensation committee, but unless you're the top executive of HR, you're often not working with these executives on those kind of issues. And I'd like to do more in that area. So that's one area, but there's not a particular tool out there that I'm interested in, but I'd like to improve my exposure to executive compensation.
I like it. Yes, like I said, if I were to be recreated as in any discipline, I would choose your discipline. Compensation, folks, it is where the money is, so it's important. It is psychology. As an HRIS person, if you're looking for another career path and you're looking to make more money, I would say I've always found that the compensation folks are usually at the top of the list because it's a very in demand, it's rigorous, definitely hard work.
Well, it's a perfect segue. I mean, I've hired people from the HRIS world. I always, as a manager, when I was hiring people, I looked from within. And I would look at the talent in HRIS, at least they're exposed to the numbers and things like that. So definitely that's a transition area, more so than, say, going from recruiting to compensation, although any area can break in, but HRIS, certainly you could move into compensation.
Yeah, and I'd say more when I was working in private business, more often than not, I would be reporting through the compensation person. So it was kind of a natural progression. If you can get there and you can study those enormous CCP manuals. But in general, it's I think it's interesting subject matter to be able to. I love understanding how people manipulates the wrong word, but are influenced by different compensation strategies and all those pieces. Hey, Scott, we really appreciate you being on the HRIS Careers podcast. Are there any last comments that you may have? I know people will likely want to follow you. I will put your LinkedIn profile and a lot of different resources that you've provided to us in the show notes. But are there any last things that you'd like to leave us with?
No, just thank you, Troy, for giving me the opportunity to address your audience and your audience in particular, because there's shared interest that I have. I want to check out some of your other podcasts even more. So I appreciate the opportunity. And the only other thing is have passion for what you do. That's the most important thing. Absolutely. That's what's kept me going all these years is I still have passion for what I do.
Absolutely. That's a good way to end it for the HRS Careers community. We'll talk to you all later.
Okay. Thank you.
Here we go.